just want to share some of my experiences on farms over the years and to demonstrate the importance of secure property rights for farmers to be able to manage the land well. This is my family in 1997 when we were in Queensland. See some ostriches in the background. This is a few years later in 2000. Our third son, Joseph, is autistic and cannot talk very well. This is us in 2003. We have farming for quite a few generations back. Here's great Uncle Sored McLean digging a dam in the 1940s in Victoria. He was 70 years old at the time. In Congarong we had a few beef cattle like this Charolais bull, and we produced Charolais cross feelers. We ran 500 Border-Leicester Merino cross ewes and produced fat lambs. We did our own shearing and milked over 100 dairy cows. We did all the intensive stuff that comes with high production on small acres. We modified the shed several times as we expanded the herd. We built a second dairy on the second block. We grew fodder crops like maize and put in centre pivot irrigation with a range of high production grasses. Every spring we put our excess grass into silage and making heaps like this, then covering them like this and feeding them out to the stock. In 1984 we owned a property Hawthorn at Springsure. Jane and I got the old house to live in and Rob and Bronnie got the new house to camp in. We bought cattle like this, and if we were lucky we sold them like this. We discovered a South African grass called buffel grass. We built buffel harvesters and harvested many hundreds of acres for buffel seed each year. Managing the property, we found we had the need to have horses for mustering and a bigger need to find some shade at lunchtime in the 40-degree heat. We made extensions to the houses and made a few friends with the wildlife. A second set of yards were built on the property and always had fun ear tagging and branding the stock. We learned about the landscape with its brigalow regrowth, which had to be blade ploughed. This kept the regrowth under control, and if you were clever you could plant sorghum undersown with buffel grass and get a reasonable crop. In 1989 we bought our own property Barkura, 50 k's north of Aramac. We arrived greeted by a galvanised burr in the house yard and all the luxuries you could want. We homeschooled the kids and renovated the house. In our spare time we did some fencing, like about 100 k's of it. There were lots of gidgee trees which were suitable for posts. These are generated in the 1950s after some very wet years. There were miles of new fences to erect and a shearing shed to renovate. Sometimes the yard looked like this, and other times it looked like this. We scrounged materials for more shaded areas and then mustered the sheep. Sometimes we employed shearers and sometimes we had friends help us peel off the fibre. Naturally we employed highly skilled rouseabouts. And when each shearing was over we hoped we could get enough income to battle on for another year. We had a variety of animals that we learned a lot more about by keeping stock alive during years of drought. Some African chooks that had an appetite for hats. We bought them before the prices crashed, so when we couldn't sell them, we decided to eat them over a 9-month period. There were goats for cashmere, which we also bought before the price of cashmere crashed. There were some wild pigs, and these would end up in Germany. But all the while, we were getting a handle on dealing with the landscape, things like floods. Here 4 inches fell on a neighbour's place the previous day, and half it came past our house soon after. This gave a green strip a few weeks later, indicating where the water flowed. And yet another flood. It made you start to think about ways to keep some of that lovely water. Then we had a lake we love to try and understand as well. Sometimes it filled up, and water lay where the living trees were. It also had areas where trees had drowned since 1974 because it had been full for over 2 consecutive years. Some of these trees were over 80 years old, so that meant that prior to 1974 the lake had never been full for 2 or more consecutive years. But even more surprising was the fact that the deepest section, some 500 acres in area, which had no living trees in it. The lake filled to this level almost every year. It too had stumps in it, which indicated the trees were at least 80 years old, although they had died probably 60-70 years earlier. This meant for those trees to have survived for 80 years, that approximately 100 years ago the runoff had to be as little as 10% of what it is today. Then we found other evidence of infiltration rates being greater years ago, but records of a permanent spring that had dried up in the 1960s, a stone dam built 80 years ago that showed the creek that it was on was half the size it is today, and places where erosion was less than 20 years old. This inspired us to try to return our land to a level that had little runoff, so we started building banks to spread water when it ran off the land. Our first trial was a 6-inch high mound which kept water on the floodplain of a creek for about 1 kilometre. It was a good trial. Then we put a water spreading project together over 8 different properties. Sometimes we used stick rake timber like here, and the stick rake timber went across gullies and slowed the water down. Other times we took levels and tying different coloured ribbons to branches and trees to indicate the different levels. We got a dozer in to follow the colour ribbons and build contour banks. And making a series of these banks, we'd be able to keep the water soaking into the soil. Note the darker saturated soil in the middle. We tried a number of designs. The best was to have borrow pits in front of the ponded areas. And here we can see the same area a few months apart with new grasses growing. In this photo we can see where the water had ponded in the bottom part of the picture. Lots of new grasses establishing. Where the ponding didn't happen on the left, there were very few of those grasses. In this picture we have a bank 5 kilometres long which had a creek feed into it. Within 2 years this had grassed up completely and the trees were growing back as well. The production in these areas improved from a 3-fold increase to over a 50 times increase. These graphs show the increase in kilograms per hectare of dry matter over 3 years, as well as the ground cover density over the same 3-year period. The cost was variable, but could be done as little as $10 per acre. Most were done with a 200 horsepower dozer with an angled blade on the front.